Well, welcome back, everybody. We are so glad that you're here with us again for another episode of the Your Blank What Now podcast. My name is Marcy Nettles, and I am your host. And today is a super special and quite sweet episode I'm going to be bringing to you. And I'm excited to introduce you to the guest today. So I'm going to share a little bit about Bob Haney. So Bob is a cordon bleu trained chef, a former college baseball player, and was a model for most of his early adult life. He started modeling when he was 22 years old in Kansas City. And at the age of 29, he was in Milan. He lived and modeled in Athens, Madrid, Barcelona, Milan, Vienna, New York, Chicago, San Francisco, and Miami. Around the age of 35, he retired from modeling and moved to Taos, New Mexico, where his sister and mother had moved. There is where his life almost ended, but God had another plan, and it's actually where his life started over again. In Eagle Nest, New Mexico, a mountain town of only 186 people, Bob was able to get sober and truly begin his life over again, starting his journey to become who the Lord intended him to be all along. So guys, I am really, really excited because in the business that we do, we have the opportunity to meet some phenomenal people. And I will just tell you that Bob is one of those really amazing people that has come into our life. And I am so excited to have you as my special guest today on the show, Bob. Thank you for saying yes.
Well, thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it. It's always nice to hang out with you and Dondi as well and be able to chat and just kind of hang out.
Yeah. Well, I'm really excited about this opportunity because we have those intimate moments to where we get to sit down and just get to know each other better. And, the 2-on-2 or the four of us together with your lovely wife. And,
Sure.
With your episode today, though, we're going to be sharing this with a greater audience. And I think it's going to be really, really impactful in the vulnerable story that you have to share. Because the episode that we're going to be sharing today is You're a Model with Addictions. What now?
Yeah, that I am. So I grew up in Omaha, Nebraska, and I'm the result of 10 marriages and 9 divorces between my 3 parents.
Wow.
And when I was 7 years old, my stepdad, who was an abusive alcoholic, got custody of all of us kids, my older sister, and then my 2 younger adopted brothers. And my dad he abused my mom and he abused us kids. I didn't get a whole lot of physical abuse, but a ton of psychological abuse. And my mom got the brunt of the physical abuse. And then, so for years, he said that he was going to quit drinking and quit abusing. And when I was 5, we adopted my younger brother, Steve. And then when I was 6, that we adopted my younger brother, Pat. And then the following year, my mom started having an affair with the tennis pro at the country club we belonged to. So that was shameful to my dad, and so he had detectives on her and the phones tapped and made my mom out to be this unfit mother and got custody of all of us kids, even though he was an abusive alcoholic. So for 5 years I had to live with him, and until I was old enough to decide if we would have gone back to court, that I wanted to live with my mom. So when I was 13, my sister and I moved to Yankton, South Dakota, where my mom and second stepdad, who was an anesthesiologist, moved to Yankton, South Dakota. And that's where I went to high school. And that's kind of where my drinking and doing drugs started. And it was the summer before my freshman year in college or high school. And I started drinking and smoking pot. And I ended up, I was a good student and I was an athlete, but I smoked pot 3 times a day throughout my entire high school career. And so, when you're a child of addiction or alcoholism, we, as you may know, each of us play a role. And I was kind of, I guess I was the black sheep. I played the role as the black sheep, and I'd gotten a little bit of trouble. And, but I was a really good athlete and a good student. So I was able to go to Nebraska, and I walked on at Nebraska and made the team. And then my drinking and drugging continued strong. And that was where I quit playing baseball, and because it took up too much of my time, and got into my drinking and drugging. And so the first time I went through rehab was the summer after my freshman year in college. So I got sober for about 11 months, played baseball my sophomore year in college, dropped out of college. That's where I reconnected with my now wife, Kathy, as you know. And I dropped out of college and followed her to Arizona. And that was where I started modeling. So I guess that was the first modeling job I ever had. And what I did was I was in a bar in Tempe. I'm not sure. How long have you been in Arizona?
Oh, I've been here a long time, 30 years almost. Mm-hmm.
So there was a bar in Tempe called Graffiti's. You remember Graffiti? It was in early 80s. And I was drunk in the bar, and this guy asked me if I wanted to do a calendar. And I said, well, sure. And so I gave him my number. About 2 weeks later, he called, and I had no recollection of him calling. And so what happened was he said, okay, well, we're going to shoot today. So we did this calendar, and Kathy and I had broken up. We dated about a year and a half. We'd broken up, and I was kind of, on a really bad downward spiral. And I ended up moving to Kansas City about a month after I shot that calendar. So I was in Kansas City. I went through rehab again, and I ended up meeting a guy at one of my meetings, and that was where I met the art director of a department store in Kansas City, and that's where I started modeling, like getting paid to model. And so I ended up working in Kansas City and Chicago, or Kansas City, Dallas, and Denver for about 7 years, just doing kind of some department store stuff. And I ended up going up to Chicago to meet with agents, and none of them would hire me. And so, because all of my portfolio was just a bunch of catalog stuff, and so the woman, trying to think of what her name is, she was the girl who discovered Cindy Crawford. It'll come to me. Marie Anderson Boyd. She discovered Cindy Crawford, and I went in, and she said, your book is pretty cataloging, not very much editorial. She said, here are the names of some photographers. Go to Miami and test, and then come back, and we'll see if we can pick you up. So I ended up going to Miami. I ended up meeting Egon von Furstenberg. You know who Diane von Furstenberg is?
Yes.
The wedding dress designer. Well, I met her ex-husband, Egon von Furstenberg, who was the Prince of Italy. So, but I meet a friend of hers the day before, the weekend before. I meet her at this coffee shop, and she comes up to me, and I would get up and run in the morning on the beach, and then smoke a cigarette, because it was back when I was still smoking. And I would have a cup of coffee, and I would read the newspaper. And this woman comes up to me, and she goes, have you ever worked in Milan before? Because Miami's kind of where models go to shoot. And so I said, well, no, not yet. I'm just kind of like, I have no idea. I don't know what is going on in Milan. I don't know any designers. I'm the hoop bat from Nebraska. I don't know those kind of things. And so she goes, well, my friend and I are going to Acapulco for a few days, but here's an invitation to a New Year's Eve party. She said, tell them that you're a friend of mine. And so I'm like, okay. So I go back to the pension that I'm staying at, and I open it up, and it says, you're cordially invited to Prince Egon von Furstenberg's New Year's Eve party.
Wow. Wow.
So I'm like, and it's an all white party. Well, again, I'm a hoop bat from Nebraska and don't really understand what an all white party is. So I call and ask what an all white party is. Yeah.
Did you have to leave your name with that ask?
I did.
Good.
So I go to the New Year's Eve party. I meet Egon. He owns part of a modeling agency in Milan. He said, come over to my condominium tomorrow. One of the bookers at this agency is going to be in town. We'll go through your book. So I go over there, and I show them my book, and they're tearing my book apart, and I had like 20 pictures in it, and they end up with like 5 pictures in it. And they said, well, we're going to take these pictures back to Milan, and we'll call you if, you know, we want to use you. So a week later, I get a call from this agency in Milan and say, okay, we want you here tomorrow. And I'm like, what do you mean you want me here tomorrow? I said, I don't have any money to go there. I have no place to stay. I said, you're going to have to fly me there, give me a place to stay, and give me money to live on there. So they said, okay. So I fly to Milan. I had this little Italian dude riding me around on a scooter, taking me to my castings. I walk into the first audition, and sitting there is Gianni Versace, and next to him is Elton John. And I'm like, what?
What universe did you just wake up in, right?
I am way out of my league at this point. So I end up, you know, I was 29 years old, and Versace liked younger men. And so I didn't get booked for that, but I end up living in Milan for about 6 months there. I go to Greece and I work for about 5 months there. And then I end up going back to Kansas City, but I stopped in Chicago and got an agent and went and saw Marie Anderson Boyd again. And she's like, your book is amazing. So she ends up signing me. I go back to Kansas City and get some things, moved to Chicago, and I lived in Chicago for about 3 years and end up back in Europe again and go to Madrid and Barcelona and Vienna and just kind of travel around. And so when I had headed to Miami for the first time, I had been sober for 3.5 years, but I stopped in a bar in New Orleans because a buddy of mine lives in New Orleans. And I was with my former roommate in Kansas City, and I said, I really wanted a glass of red wine. It's the only thing really I missed about drinking was a glass of good red wine. So we went into this wine bar. I had a glass of red wine and ended up on a 7-year binge.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. So then what happened is that I moved back. I was living in Chicago. I worked in Chicago, ended up going through binging really hard, started doing a lot of cocaine, and end up in rehab again. Because I had been in rehab several times, I kind of knew the lingo, and it wasn't like I was trying to manipulate anybody, but I just kind of knew what to say. And I was just kind of, you know, doing what I knew they wanted me to do. And I wanted to quit, but I still didn't have it really in me. So I ended up moving to a halfway house in New York, started doing some commercials. I did a couple Old Navy commercials and started doing a lot of catalog work, and end up moving to San Francisco because one of the summers that I was there, it was kind of slow in New York. So I moved to San Francisco. I got booked to do a billboard for the Gap, and I get there, and the art director was this like 23-year-old fresh out of college art director. And when I got there, I didn't bring a bunch of different shoe options. And she goes, where's your shoe bag? And I said, well, I wasn't told to bring a shoe bag. And she goes, what are we going to do about that? Maybe you should go over and sit and think about what we're going to do about that. And I'm like, what are you putting me in timeout? I ended up telling her a few things that were on my mind. I told her I was done. I walked out, called my agent in New York and said, I'm done. And I moved to Taos, New Mexico. My sister and my mom had moved there. And so I called my sister. I said, I'm going to be in Taos tomorrow. She's like, what do you mean, Bobby? I said, I don't know what I'm going to be in Taos tomorrow. She goes, oh, well, what are you going to do in Taos? There's nothing for you to do here. And I'm like, I don't know. So I ended up moving to Taos and literally almost drank myself and drugged myself to death in about a 1.5-year period of time. I rolled 2 cars in 6 months. One of the time, the first car I rolled, it rolled 4 times. And had it rolled another quarter of a turn, it would have fallen off a 100-foot cliff.
Wow.
Yeah.
Crazy.
So I met this old girlfriend of mine, and her grandparents had built a house in this kind of mountain lake town called Eagle Nest. And I ended up moving in with her, and she and I were like fire and gasoline together. And I love her to death. We're still really good friends. But she and I were going to both stop drinking. I came to one morning, and literally the Lord put his hand on my shoulder and said, you're going to either end up in jail, you're going to end up dying, or you're going to hurt somebody because of your drinking. And so at that point, he took the compulsion away. I started bartending 2 weeks later and haven't had a drink since.
Wow.
Yeah.
That is amazing. It's like, thank you, Jesus, right? I mean,
No doubt. No doubt.
when we have no power ourselves, he has it all.
Well, and I literally probably a month earlier, I remember waking up one morning, it was probably in the afternoon, waking up one afternoon and sitting on the side of my bed and thinking, I don't think I can stop this. And literally fearful that I didn't think that I was ever going to be able to stop drinking, because it consumed my life. I mean, every day I got up and drank, and every day I ended up making bad decisions, and I had no life. I mean, I was lucky at the time to be able to, well, lucky or unlucky, it was a blessing and a curse at the same time, to have some money that I was able to live on. It wasn't much, but it wasn't as though I had to work. And so that, like I said, was a blessing and a curse. And so that's what enabled me to do the things I did. And it was pretty bad. I was in a bad space. And so luckily the Lord, and that was, I started bartending 2 weeks after I stopped drinking.
Wow. Yeah. That's amazing that total compulsion, that complete desire that had been driving you basically,
Yeah.
I would say safely, we could say from the time that you were 13 years old,
Right.
it was driving you and it was like part of your blood almost, right?
It was 100%.
And to have it be gone just like that.
It was literally crazy. And I don't, like, the other times that I had quit drinking, being around it bothered me. I mean, it was hard. It was like day to day, struggle every day. It was hard for me to not drink the other 3 times that I had stopped drinking. And this time it just literally, the compulsion was taken away. And the only thing I can attest to it is God. I mean,
Yeah.
because there's no other reason, but God.
Yeah.
So,
Oh, I love but God's, and I love suddenlies. I love his
yeah.
suddenlies when he just shows up and goes to work. So, if you wouldn't mind, would you dive a little bit deeper into the time that you were modeling, maybe overseas or even here in the States, when you were using and you had just really breakdown opportunities where, can you remember any specific times that you think would be impactful for the audience?
Well, I guess there was a time when I was living in Athens that I wasn't working much. I mean, because Athens, Greece is not really. It's Milan and Paris are kind of the meccas for modeling, but I wasn't at. There's the upper 1% of the working models that make lots and lots of money, and then there's right below that there's about a 10% of people that work, but barely making a living at it. And there was a time when I was in Athens where I would go get a loaf of bread and I could get some Greek wine at this restaurant for cheap, and that was all I had. And it was and then they ended up sending me to Austria, Vienna, Austria, where it was, I mean, I worked even less in Austria, and it was, I didn't know. I had done a jockey commercial in Chicago maybe 2 years before. And luckily my agent in Chicago called one day and said that they wanted to pick that up for another run, which enabled me to be able to pay the agency that I was working for enough, because the agencies take money out for the accommodations and to send your book around and whatnot for you to, and so I was able to pay that agency off and get a plane ticket home. And otherwise who knows, I'd be walking around Europe right now.
Oh, wow. Wow.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Oh, okay. So
Yeah.
I have to ask you this question just because it just popped into my head. But back when you were modeling, was there as much airbrushing going on in those magazines as there is nowadays?
there wasn't, because that technology really hadn't happened yet. I mean, I remember one time back when kind of Photoshop just came out, and a friend of mine worked in the graphic art industry, and he took some black and white pictures and touched them up so that my eyes were the color of my eyes, which are really blue. And then he did something to it at the tie. It was a black and white I had a really cool tie on. So he colorized the tie in my eyes. And so back then, that was like really different and unique. And that was, they always said that, that they would airbrush things. Well, that's why they hire models, so that they don't have to airbrush things. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I do, but I also know that there's a lot of airbrushing that goes on nowadays.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
And
Oh, for
and
sure.
and so for those of us that are like normal people like me, looking at the pictures in there and comparing myself to somebody that's been airbrushed, I have to remember it's like, this is not necessarily exactly all true.
Well, right. And they'll take, and
tapering.
Yeah. And they can do that these days, in seconds. Whereas back in the day, they would have to pay an artist to spend, 2 hours, 3 hours to do that, because the technology, like this is back, before 2000. This is back in like late 1990s. And so it wasn't as prevalent back then as it is now. You can do it yourself, for heaven's sakes, now. So
right.
I mean, look at all the filters that the girls and the kids,
yeah.
I'll say all the kids use. I don't even know how to use those.
I don't know how to use them either. And it's like, thank God I don't need to quite yet, but still it's nice. It's yeah. So thank you for answering that off the cuff question there. So let's get back to Eagle Nest. It's like, you said that this is where things just completely changed. God put his hand on you and you just totally lost that desire for alcohol, and the addictions were just like completely stifled for you. And then you went and became a bartender. What happened from there? I mean, because you are definitely not a bartender now.
No. And so what happened then is, ironically, so it's amazing how God works. I was in this relationship with this, old girlfriend, and she didn't quit drinking. I did quit drinking. And so she had ended up moving out of the house that we lived in. And I didn't really know what I was going to do. So I ended up just thinking I was going to go back to Taos. And so I packed up my things and I headed out. And Elena's parents who are still amazing, good friends of mine. They were like surrogate parents to me, because the first several years of my sobriety, they were there for me. And Royce and Pam are their names. And so I ended up about a half hour outside of Amarillo. I had moved to Amarillo because Elena and her family were from Amarillo. So we moved to Amarillo. We lived there for about a year before I moved back to Omaha. But what happened is I decided I was going to pack up and move back to Taos. So I drive to start heading to Taos. I was a half hour out of Amarillo and my car broke down. So I called Royce. He came and picked me up and he's like, "What are you going to do?" I'm like, "I have no idea what I'm going to do." And he goes, "Maybe you should go back to Omaha." And so I didn't want to come back to Omaha, but I thought, this is where, I was born and raised, and the majority of, even though my mom wasn't there, my sister wasn't there. Actually, I think my sister had moved back to Omaha. So, but my first stepdad is here, and my brothers and sister, stepbrothers, adopted brothers, they're all here. So I moved back to Omaha and I worked in some restaurants when I got back here. And I just kind of got tired of people not showing up on time. And when they did show up, not doing the job. And so what I did is you have had pan crepes. So I had created this product called pan crepes, which was a cross between a pancake and a crepe. And it was a batter. 40% of the mix was a yogurt batter. And I trademarked the name Pan Crepes and I started selling it to restaurants in Omaha.
Was this before or after you went to culinary school?
Oh, this is way before.
Really? I didn't know that. That's so cool.
Yeah. So I had cooked my entire life since I was a little kid. So during the time when I was um, with my first stepdad, who was the abusive alcoholic, um, my grandmother, my mom's mom. So my dad wouldn't let me talk to my mom, but once a week. But my grandmother, I called her every single day for 7 years. I did not miss a day that I didn't talk to my grandma. So when I trademarked the name Pancrapes, I incorporated my company, Gladys Inc., because my grandma's name was Gladys.
Oh, I love that.
And so I sold the batter to.
Okay, so our audience doesn't know what pancrepes are.
Oh, okay.
So can you explain what that is?
Sure. So pancakes are a combination of 3 ingredients of a pancake recipe my mom made, 2 ingredients of a pancake recipe my grandma made, and I combined those 5 ingredients. And one day there wasn't enough of one of the ingredients, which was sour cream, but there was yogurt in the refrigerator. So I used the yogurt. I'm like, oh, that'll work. And then over the years, I just kind of tweaked it so it was consistent. So I digress. So when I lived in Kansas City, I would come up to Omaha about once a month from the time my grandmother was 80 until she passed away when she was 89. I would come up about once a month, excuse me, and I would cook for her, and I would fill her refrigerator with food, and we'd hang out and smoke cigarettes and play cards, literally for like 15 hours, like over during the weekend, every day we would hang out and she taught me manners. She taught me etiquette. She just taught me how to treat people. She was amazing. She was so amazing, but she was my rock and my foundation. So, and she was the one who kind of instilled the love of cooking. And so I had always cooked. So when I would go to Europe, when I was in Europe, I would always cook for people, and I would always give recipes of anything that I ever made out. But the one recipe I always held on to was that pancakes recipe. So I trademarked the name Pancrapes. I started selling it to restaurants. I ended up having two. So I also did the farmers market, and I did all those things for about 4.5, 5 years. I had two really big licensing agreements fall through. I ended up, after the second one, I ended up moving to Austin because I had kind of worn out the Omaha scene. Not many people would even try pancrapes. So what happened is I ended up moving to Austin, going to culinary school. I graduated from there. But when I first started culinary school, out of the blue, in like late in January, no, not January, in like November of 2008, I get this random email from my now wife, Kathy, who was my girlfriend when we were 12. I gave her a ring when we were 12, and then that was who I dropped out of college and followed to Arizona when I was 20. So I hadn't seen her in 25 years, hadn't heard from her in 25 years. But I get this random email because her brother had given her my email address and saying, join Facebook. Kathy Swanson wants you to join Facebook. And I'm like, well, sure, if I can see your smiling face. Now I knew she was married and had kids, but I thought, oh, I'd love to, see what you're doing. So we ended up just messaging back and forth. She was in a relationship or marriage that just wasn't good, so to say. Her mom went to see she and the girls down in Florida and said, you're coming home with me. So they moved back to Omaha. I'm in Austin in culinary school, and I not dropped out of culinary school, but when I graduated from culinary school, I followed her back to Omaha. I started teaching and then started working on converting the Pancrapes batter recipe to a shelf-stable dry mix.
Amazing. And Kathy is so worth following all over the United States.
No doubt. I'd follow her all over the world.
Right. I completely believe you, and I understand why, for sure. So, before we move on to what you're doing now, I'd like you just to take a second and just think, if you could go back and talk to yourself, before you got so into these addictions, or even when you were in them,
Right.
Is there anything in particular from your wisdom that you have now that you would like to share with yourself back then?
I get asked that question a lot, just because I have said there's so many situations like when playing baseball, I didn't know when I was my sophomore year in college that my dad had a scout come look at me. And when I was 38 years old, he and I were out to lunch, and he goes, "Did I ever tell you I had a scout come look at you after your sophomore year in college?" And I said, "Well, no, you didn't tell me." I said, "What did he say?" He said, "Well, if you needed 10 stars to make major leagues, you had 9." And I'm like, do you think that might have been pertinent information to give a 20-year-old who's dropping out of college and following a girl to Arizona? But that's the kind of stepdad he was. He would rather put barricades up in front of you than move the barricade out of your way. So,
Oh.
but just some of the decisions, the decisions that you make when you're young create who you are when you're older. And I think of all of the situations and all of the really, really bad decisions that I made. If I hadn't have made those, I wouldn't be where I am today. I wouldn't have I wouldn't have had the experiences that I had that helped in every situation that I'm doing now. If I hadn't, walking into a casting and meeting Gianni Versace and Elton John, that you can't be starstruck in that situation. So in turn, being able to walk into meet the head of menu development for Chick-fil-A, or meeting with IHOP's culinary team, or meeting with some of the other companies, the billion-dollar companies that I've met with doing Heavenly Waffles now, you have to go in there with confidence. And I think I look back at all of the things that I did, and I think there was a lot of self-confidence issues that I had, which is why I drank and did drugs. When you grow up in a house where there's alcoholism and abuse, there's going to be some self-confidence issues, because you think that it's, what did I do wrong? What am I doing wrong? And then on top of the psychological abuse that I had from my dad and the physical abuse, it's, your self-confidence is low. And so you can't look back and think, if I had only done this, and if I had done something different, I wouldn't be where I am. And I'm so happy where I am today. And again, I'm still a work in progress for sure. Just ask Kathy.
You know what? Right. I know. Ask any of our spouses. You know what?
Right.
And that is so perfect, and it's so beautiful, because it is true. Everything that we go through that does not kill us is designed to help grow us.
Sure.
And strengthen us into who we need to be to do what he has planned for us. Right. So maybe then would you say to people that might be in the situation that you found yourself in back when you had those addictions, back when you were out and you were kind of lost and wandering, would you just say, just keep going?
Right. Yeah. Fight through it. I mean, I think always try to make if every day you wake up and try to make yourself a better person and try to brighten other people's day. I think thinking that every day when you wake up will help you make better decisions. If getting up and going and buying an 8-ball of cocaine, and you think that that's going to make you have a better day, it's not going to make you have a better day. That's not doing the next best right thing. That's not going to put a smile on somebody's face. So if you try to wake up every day, try to make somebody else smile and do the next right thing, then that will point you in the right direction. And maybe you're not going to always be able to do it, and you might zigzag, but if you try and do that every single morning, then you'll eventually get there.
Yes. And, that's a perfect message, because I know a lot of the people that will be listening to this podcast, to this episode, are in a spot where they feel stuck. And so when they think about just jumping from point A to point B, getting to where they ultimately want to be, that can be overwhelming. And I mean, for anyone, that can be overwhelming, for someone that's not addicted, or someone that's not lost. Right.
Sure.
And so just reinforcing, it's just one step at a time. Just try to do the next right thing. Right.
There's a Sanskrit proverb, and it's, look to this day, for it is light, the very light of life. And it's brief. I'm trying to think of what it is. I would have to look it up. in its brief course a reality. For yesterday is but a dream, and tomorrow is only a vision. But today, well lived, makes every day a vision of hope, and every tomorrow a dream of happiness.
Yes.
And so, look well, therefore, to this day. And so, staying in today. Don't worry about yesterday, and just don't stress about what you did yesterday, and don't worry about tomorrow. And just stay in today. I think, and do the next right thing is always kind of the best way to go. And it's hard sometimes, because sometimes you don't have any money, and you don't know if you're going to eat, or you don't know how your business is going to do. You don't know if there's going to be a lockdown. You don't know if there's going to be a mask mandate, or if they're going to try to force you to get a vaccine. I mean, there's just so many things that you could worry about, but everything is going to be okay.
Yeah.
And the Lord's not going to take you down the wrong path. Have faith in the Lord, I think is probably the most important thing.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with you 100%. So I would really love now for you to continue the story of pan crepes and where you are today with those, because we have to make sure that I got to tell you guys, I'm not even going to say what they are or what they can be, but I've tasted these things and they can change your life. They are so good, and they don't fit into just one box. They can be whatever you want them to be, which is so amazing. So
many different things.
Yes. So after I've peaked with that, tell us more about how pan crepes became where you are now.
So pan crepes, after 5 years and 4 food scientists of converting the original batter form to a shelf-stable dry mix, my 2 brother-in-laws had just bought a distribution company, and they were like, when are you going to get pan crepes going? And so what happened was we started selling our dry mix. Well, hang on, let me see. I'll grab one of the boxes and I'll show you.
And for our viewing audience, just so you guys know, I will be putting these up onto a YouTube channel in the near future, so you'll be able to see the box as well. But I have to tell you, before he gets back here, you guys, your mouth should be watering right now. They're so good.
So here is.
Now, keep in mind, I just kind of keyed it up because this is an audio, but I did let them know that they'll have to stay tuned for when I put this up on YouTube so that they can see it. Yes.
So I'm showing the box of pan crepes that we had initially. So initially, it was a product I called pan crepes. We had them in 250 grocery stores in the Midwest. We would go do demos from Minneapolis down to Houston. And when we were there, they would sell out. But when we weren't there, they sat on the shelves. So, and all of those demonstrations were all out of our pocket. So after about 4 years of doing that, go ahead. Did you have a question?
So I just want to further clarify for the audience. So pan crepes, would you kind of compare them a little bit to like crepes that you can get in Patisserie, and just a thin pancake type?
They're kind of like a Swedish pancake, kind of a cross between a pancake and a crepe, and that's kind of how that came about.
The pan crepes. Okay, that makes sense. Pan crepes. Okay. Perfect.
And so we had them in about 250 grocery stores. When we were there, like I said, we would sell out. When we weren't there, they sat on the shelves. So after about 4.5 years of that, we were on our way down to take my mother-in-law had a house in Scottsdale, and we were driving her car down there. She was flying down, and we were driving her car down. And my bonus daughters, Kate and Allie are my bonus daughters. And when on the way down, their former tennis coach had moved to Arizona. I think you met Dan. And so his daughter, who loved his grandmother's recipe of waffles, which was club soda and egg and oil and Bisquick, had gotten a waffle iron for Christmas. And she woke up and she ran into her mom and dad's room and she was crying. She was like, we don't have any Bisquick. And Dan rolled over and he's like, we have pan crepes mix, just use that. So he sent us a picture of her waffles using pan crepes mix. And we had done that. We had tried to make them waffle style just using water, because making the pancakes, it was just water to mix. But theirs, it looked different. And so when we got there, we called him and we were like, what did you guys do different? Why do they look so fluffy? And so he told us what the recipe was. And we literally went to Williams-Sonoma immediately and got a Breville waffle iron, made them waffle style. When we got back to Omaha, about a week or so later, we totally rebranded from Pancrepes to Waffles by Pancrepes. Do you remember Waffles by Pancrepes?
No, I think that it was Heavenly Waffles when we had them. Yeah.
So
Good.
So for about 5 months, because I had a hard time letting go of Pancrepes, because it was a product that I made for my grandma. It was her, you know what I mean? So it was
that emotional connection.
Yeah, I held on to that for a while. And so we were doing a demonstration at Williams-Sonoma in Omaha, and we were making a waffle, and Waffles by Pancrepes. And this woman looked at us and she goes, do I need a crepe? Looked at the sign. She goes, do I need a crepe pan? And I'm like, well, no, you need a waffle iron. This is a waffle. And so at that point, we went home. I literally got rid of everything Pancrepes. We trademarked the name Heavenly Waffles that day and got out of retail and started selling to restaurants and started doing a lot of corporate events and things like that. And so it was at that point when Heavenly Waffles were born. And we came up with Heavenly Waffles because my grandmother's in heaven, and so Heavenly Waffles.
Oh, perfect. So it's still grandma's.
It's still grandma's.
And they are heavenly.
They are heavenly. And so now we have them in 32 restaurants nationwide. We have 2 different national accounts that we're really close to getting. We've met with some of the big boys, and we're poised. I would imagine that in the next couple of years, we'll have our mix in at least 1,000 to 1,500 restaurants nationwide.
I love that. I'm praying for that for sure.
Well, and 40% of our mix is yogurt. There's only 110 calories, 7 grams of protein, low in sodium, low in carbs, and they don't give you that big dough ball in your belly feeling, when you have a pancake or a waffle and you're like, I need a nap. When you eat Heavenly Waffles, you don't get that. You can, if your listeners go to heavenlywaffles.com or go to our Instagram page is amazing.
What is it? Heavenly Waffles?
It's Heavenly Waffles. Yeah.
Okay. So heavenlywaffles.com or Heavenly Waffles on Instagram, guys. You got to go there. You got to go there. Because can't they also get the dry mix sent to them? They can order it and do it at home.
100%. Yeah. They can order online.
I love that. But you have to make sure that they know. They have to know that they have to mix it how? In
a blender. Make sure to blend it in a blender. Also, so because we are replacing 40% of the flour with 40% dry yogurt, flour absorbs moisture a lot more than the dry yogurt. So you need to blend it in a blender, not a hand mixer, not a KitchenAid, in a blender with the vortex that pulls it down, and you blend it on high, which is kind of the antithesis of what most pancakes or waffles do, because you don't want to overwork the flour. But because we're getting rid of so much flour, you definitely blend it in a blender. But also when you're making it, so before you pour the batter into the waffle iron, spray it just a little bit, fill it 3/4 of the way, and then let it start to bubble before you close it. That's key, because you're allowing some of the moisture to steam out. So 25 to 30 seconds before you close the waffle iron, then close it 5 minutes and you're golden.
Oh my gosh, guys. So did you hear that, by the way? This is higher in protein. It uses yogurt, so it's good for you. There's less gluten in it because they use less flour. So all the way around, guys, these waffles seriously are heavenly, and you need to go and get some for sure. I know that I need to go and place an order myself. But, so before we close out here today, Bob, I have just enjoyed this conversation. I've actually learned a lot about you, and I love it. I can't wait to have more conversations. But will you just is there a final thought? I mean, because think about this, you have had quite the span in your life, going from all of those different parent parents that you
Right.
had when you were growing up, and the different influences and the different things that you learned there, into high school, where you were already using alcohol and marijuana, and you were an athlete, but you kind of threw that stuff away because of the addictions,
Right.
into being a model and traveling the world, but being addicted so much that, you got to a breaking point. But can you just share a final thought from the man that you are now, and what from your wisdom, from your core, from your knower, right?
I guess I was always kind of the type of person who I thought I knew everything. And I think the older you get, the wiser you get, the more you realize you don't know. And especially when you're younger, man, when you're younger, you think you just literally know everything. And when you're in that place, you can't learn anything. If you know everything, there's no room in your head to learn anything. There just isn't, because you already think you know it all. And I always kind of thought I knew everything. And I just, that, like I said, the older and wiser, the more experiences that I have and that I go through, I realize how little I really do know. And so if, every day, if you can learn something, that's a benefit. It's a positive thing. Every day, if you wake up and try to do the next right thing and try to be a better person and put a smile on people's face, that's a good thing. But just realize that you don't know everything, and be open to learning something new every day.
Amen. Lifelong learner. You got to be that. Bob, thank you so much for being such an amazing guest today. Will you please give Kathy a great big hug for me? Because I definitely miss you guys. And guys, I hope that you enjoyed this episode and learned so much about the journey and what it can really be like. Even if you are in a really difficult time, just do the next right thing. Focus on where you're at, but know that you're not going to stay there. If you try to help others smile, and
Right.
just put one foot in front of the other.
Being persistent. I think being persistent also, you have to be persistent and persevere through those tough times, and know that it's, one of the things that my dad always used to say, that all bleeding stops and you're going to be okay. Everything's going to be okay.
Yes.
So,
So in Tony Robbins' Life Mastery event that we just finished up with, one of the things that we got to do was the cold bath, or the ice plunge.
oh, wow.
And an amazing gentleman spoke to us beforehand, and I cannot remember his name. I wish I could, but one of the things he said just went right along with what you just shared. It's just, every moment ends.
Right.
Every moment ends. So no matter where you're at right now, it's going to end. It may
Right.
take a while, but that's
Right.
okay.
It is. And I think, when you're a little kid, or when you're in high school, or wherever you are in life, you perceive things as being so huge and so, like, bigger than you are. And, when I graduated from high school, that literally was the easiest thing you will ever complete. And I say that to kids that are in high school or just going to high school. I'm like, this will be the easiest thing you ever have to complete. And they look at me as though I'm crazy, because everything seems so huge when you're younger. And it's just, every day is a new day. And so you can always accomplish what you set out to do. Those who fail quit. You don't fail if you don't quit, or you don't succeed if you quit, I guess is a better way to put it.
Well, all failing is growth.
Right.
It's what you shouldn't do next time.
Sure.
Exactly. Right. That's all.
And you learn from those mistakes,
exactly.
And not necessarily mistakes, but you try one way, and if it doesn't work, try it another way. I mean, that's what we had to do with Pancrepes to Heavenly Waffles. I mean, the Pancrepes was not working. It wasn't going. We had maxed out what we were capable of doing with it. And so it was harder for people to understand. It was harder for people to make. But Heavenly Waffles are pretty self-explanatory. And so, when you try them, you'll understand.
Yeah, they are absolutely amazing. Absolutely. So don't forget, guys, Heavenly Waffles on Instagram. Go and follow them and check out. Oh my gosh, you'll be able to see the sweet. You'll be able to see the savory. You'll be able to see the mix of the two and just all
Oh
of
yeah.
the awesome stuff out there. And then you'll definitely want to go to heavenlywaffles.com and get your order in and just get that in your mouth because it melts in your mouth, literally. So
Yeah.
good. Oh, Bob, thank you so much. Thank you for sharing your episode of You're a Model with Addictions, What Now? And I love the journey that you have been on. And I'm excited for what the future is bringing for you, for Kathy, for your family, and for Heavenly Waffles.
Well,
So
thank
thank
you
you
so much.
so much. I appreciate you.
Oh, Marcy, you're more than welcome. Will you give Dondi a big hug, and we love you guys, and have a great night.
Thank you. You as well. All right, guys, thanks for listening. And I can't wait to bring you the next episode of the Your Blank What Now podcast. Have a blessed day.
Thanks.